The skies over Vetra Prime shimmered with the haunting glow of far-off detonations. Smoke coiled into the atmosphere, mingling with ash that clung to the ruins of a once prosperous world. Amidst the wreckage staggered Lirien, a soldier of the Xarven species, her body battered by the relentless war. Blood seeped from a jagged wound on her temple, and her arm hung limp, twisted unnaturally. Yet, her physical injuries paled compared to the despair festering in her soul. The Xarven had considered themselves invincible, their technology and intelligence unmatched. But they had underestimated humanity. The humans, though physically weaker, had triumphed with creativity and resilience, countering Xarven strategies with unfathomable ingenuity. Their adaptability shattered Xarven fleets and morale alike. Lirien collapsed against the remnants of a fallen spire, her breath ragged. Alone, injured, and disconnected from her unit, she could only reflect on her people's hubris. They had initiated this war, believing they were destined to dominate the stars. Now their arrogance lay in ruins alongside their cities. In the distance, the low hum of engines sent a tremor through her. Lirien's pointed ears twitched as the sound grew louder. Instinctively, she dragged herself behind a chunk of debris, her heart racing. Moments later, silhouettes emerged from the smoke. Humans, their forms illuminated by the crimson hues of the setting sun. They moved with caution, their weapons gleaming and ready. Leading them was Captain Aron Voss, a seasoned warrior with sharp eyes that seemed to cut through the battlefield's chaos. His squad was sweeping the area, ensuring no enemy forces lingered to regroup. Lirien's pale, iridescent skin glimmered faintly as she stepped into view, her hands raised in a gesture of surrender. The humans froze. "Hold your fire," Voss commanded, his voice calm but firm. One soldier hesitated, his finger hovering over the trigger. "It's one of them. Should we?" "She's unarmed," Aron interrupted. "We don't execute prisoners." Lirien's knees buckled, and she crumpled to the ground, her strength spent. Through blurred vision, she saw Aron approach, his weapon lowered but ready. "Do you understand me?" he asked, his tone steady. "Yes," she whispered, her accent thick but her meaning clear. Aron crouched to her level, scrutinizing her. Despite the differences in their species, her expression mirrored something he'd seen in his own soldiers: desperation. "She's injured," he said over his shoulder. "Stabilize her. We're taking her back to base." A medic moved to assist, but Lirien flinched, too drained to resist. "You're not our enemy right now," Aron said softly. "You're just another survivor." For the first time since the war began, Lirien felt an unexpected emotion: compassion. At the human encampment, Lirien was met with a mixture of suspicion and disdain. Their temporary base, cobbled together from scraps of surviving infrastructure, buzzed with activity. Soldiers repaired vehicles, shared meals, and tended to the wounded, their camaraderie starkly contrasting with the Xarven's rigid, duty-driven camps. Captain Voss, barked Major Kellis, a stern officer with a reputation for ruthlessness. His sharp gaze fell on Lirien. "Why is she here?" "She surrendered," Aron replied. "She's injured and unarmed." The Major's lip curled. "The Xarven showed no mercy at Alpha Colony." "Why should we?" "Because if we don't, we're no better than them," Aron countered. The Major relented with a scowl. "She's your problem now, Voss. Don't make me regret it." Aron guided Lirien to an isolated tent at the camp's edge. "This is where you'll stay," he said. "Don't wander. Don't cause trouble." Lirien nodded. "Thank you," she murmured, her voice barely audible. "What's your name?" Aron asked. "Lirien," she replied, her alien tongue twisting over the human words. "Well, Lirien, you're lucky I found you," he said simply before leaving. That night, Aron returned with a tray of food. The warm aroma surprised Lirien, drawing her from her melancholy. "Why help me?" she asked, her voice halting. "Because war's hell," Aron replied. "We've all lost too much already. Saving one life, maybe it counts for something." "You're different," she said softly. "Your people have mercy." Aron's gaze darkened. "We had to learn it the hard way." Lirien studied him, her luminous eyes reflecting the flickering campfires. Aron, in turn, saw not an enemy, but someone caught in the same maelstrom of loss and survival. Over the next few days, Lirien adjusted to life among the humans. Aron provided her with a translator, enabling them to communicate more easily. "What were you doing in the ruins?" Aron asked one morning. "I was with the defense force," Lirien admitted. "When the city fell, I hid. There was nothing left to fight for. Do you regret it?" Her voice wavered. "I regret that my people's pride brought us here. I fought because I was told to, not because I believed in it." Aron regarded her thoughtfully. She wasn't defiant like other Xarven captives. She was broken, disillusioned. "You're lucky we're not like your commanders," he said. "Most would have killed you on sight." "I know," she whispered. "That's why I'm grateful." Though mistrusted by many in the camp, Lirien found an unexpected ally in Aron. His kindness was reluctant but genuine, and she came to rely on his presence. As days turned to weeks, the barriers between them began to crumble, replaced by an unspoken understanding. Aron's team, initially wary, saw her as a symbol of possibility, a small chance that even amidst war, bridges could be built. For Lirien, Aron became more than a captor. He was her protector, her connection to a new way of life. And as the flames of war began to fade, a fragile hope grew between them, a hope that hinted at a future where their worlds might one day coexist. The camp stirred early, its makeshift streets alive with the shuffle of boots and the hum of machinery. Lirien sat alone at the edge of her tent, a bowl of stew in her hands. The sun's pale light filtered through the dust-choked air, lending an eerie stillness to the morning. She sipped the broth slowly, its warmth foreign but comforting. The humans ate noisily nearby, casting occasional glances her way, some curious, others hostile. Captain Aron Voss appeared from the command tent, his expression grim. He scanned the camp until his eyes landed on her. Lirien's gaze darted away, but it was too late. Aron strode over, his presence commanding yet unthreatening. "Morning," he greeted, crouching to meet her at eye level. "How's the arm?" She flexed her healing limb, encased in a human-made splint. It no longer throbbed constantly, though pain still lurked beneath the surface. "Better. Your medic is skilled." Aron nodded. "We've had plenty of practice patching people up." "Too much, really?" Lirien studied his face. The sharp angles of his jaw, the faint creases at the corners of his mouth, and the weight behind his eyes all spoke of someone who had seen too much, borne too many burdens. Yet there was a kindness there, tempered by pragmatism. "You seem troubled," she ventured. He leaned back on his heels, exhaling slowly. "Command's sending us on a recon mission. Another Xarven outpost is nearby. We're to scout it out and assess its threat level." "You plan to attack?" she asked hesitantly. "If necessary. It depends on what we find." Aron's tone was careful, but Lirien caught the edge of resolve beneath it. "We leave in an hour." Lirien set her bowl down, her fingers trembling slightly. "Will I stay here?" "Yes," Aron said firmly. "It's safer." Safer. Lirien knew the word, but it felt hollow. Nowhere was safe, not for her, not for anyone. She nodded nonetheless. "Keep your head down," Aron added as he stood. He paused, looking as though he wanted to say more, but thought better of it. Instead, he turned and walked away, barking orders to his squad. The hours stretched endlessly after the reconnaissance team departed. The camp felt emptier without the steady rhythm of Aron's voice directing his soldiers. Lirien busied herself as best she could, tending to small tasks the humans allowed her to perform. Still, the weight of uncertainty pressed heavily on her. When night fell, the distant horizon erupted in flashes of light. The unmistakable sound of explosions rolled across the landscape moments later. The camp buzzed with anxious energy as soldiers prepared for the worst. Lirien's chest tightened. She didn't need words to know something had gone wrong. Hours passed before the first transport vehicles returned. Medics swarmed as injured soldiers were carried out, their blood staining the stretchers. Lirien lingered at the edge of the chaos, her heart pounding. Then she saw him. Aron stumbled out of one of the transports, his helmet gone, his face streaked with grime. His left arm hung limp, a hastily wrapped bandage dark with blood. Yet he moved with purpose, barking orders even as his knees threatened to buckle. "Voss," one of the medics called. "Get over here. That arm needs treatment." Later, Aron snapped, his voice hoarse. "Get the critical cases first." Lirien's feet moved before she realized it. She reached him just as he swayed dangerously. Without thinking, she placed a hand on his good arm, steadying him. Aron's sharp eyes softened slightly as he recognized her. "You shouldn't be here," he muttered, though there was no heat in his words. "You're hurt," she said simply. "Let me help." Aron hesitated but relented, allowing her to guide him to a nearby bench. A medic approached moments later, glaring at Lirien before focusing on Aron's injuries. "What happened?" Lirien asked quietly. Aron winced as the medic began cleaning his wound. "The outpost was more fortified than we thought. They've got anti-air batteries, ground patrols, the works. We barely made it out." "Did you lose many?" she asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted the answer. Aron's jaw tightened. "Too many. But we got intel now. Command will know how to handle it." Lirien's fingers curled into fists. Her people's pride had built those fortifications, and now both sides bled for it. "This must end," she murmured almost to herself. Aron's gaze snapped to hers. For a moment, there was something unreadable in his expression. Then he leaned back, letting out a tired sigh. "You're not wrong," he admitted. "But ending it, that's the hard part." In the days that followed, the camp settled into an uneasy rhythm. The soldiers who had survived the reconnaissance mission were given time to recover, though tensions ran high. Rumors swirled of an impending assault on the Xarven outpost, and every able-bodied soldier prepared for battle. Lirien watched silently as Aron pushed himself through his recovery, ignoring his body's protests. She admired his determination, but couldn't ignore the toll it took on him. One evening, as he sat sharpening his knife by the fire, she approached cautiously. "You should rest," she said softly. "Rest doesn't win wars," he replied without looking up. "But exhaustion loses them," she countered. Aron glanced at her, a faint smirk tugging at his lips. "You're not wrong." She hesitated before sitting beside him. The firelight danced across her pale skin, casting shadows that made her look almost human. "What will you do if you win?" she asked after a long silence. Aron paused, his knife stilling in his hands. "If we win?" He let out a dry laugh. "Rebuild, I guess. Try to make something better than this mess we've all made. And my people?" She pressed, her voice trembling. "What will happen to them?" Aron's expression darkened. "That depends on them. Surrender would save lives, but I don't think your leaders are ready for that." Lirien's heart sank. She knew he was right. Her people's pride would never allow surrender. Not until they were utterly broken. "Maybe," she said quietly. "It doesn't have to be your leaders or mine who decide." Aron looked at her, his brow furrowing. "What are you saying?" Lirien took a deep breath. "If I could speak to your command, tell them what I know, maybe we could find another way. Before more lives are lost." Aron's eyes widened slightly, and for the first time, she saw a flicker of hope. But it was quickly tempered by caution. "You betray your own people?" he asked. "I'd save them," she corrected. "And yours?" Aron's silence was deafening, a storm of doubt and hope swirling behind his eyes. The fire crackled between them, casting sparks that fizzled out before reaching the sky. Lirien felt the weight of his scrutiny, her heart drumming against her ribs like a caged bird. "Do you really think they'd listen to you?" Aron finally spoke, his voice low, guarded. "They have to," she said, the words almost a plea. "I can tell them the truth, the vulnerabilities of our outposts, the weaknesses they wouldn't have known otherwise. I can make them understand that this war, it's unsustainable for both sides." Aron leaned back, running a hand through his hair. He was tired. She could see it in the dark circles under his eyes and the way his fingers trembled. Yet he was considering it. The lines of his face softened as he weighed her words, and for a brief moment, Lirien dared to hope. "It's dangerous," he murmured. "If they discover you're working with us, they already think I'm a traitor. Lirien said, her voice steadying. To the Xarven, I am, but to you, I could be something different. An ally. Aron let out a sharp breath, glancing at the nearby soldiers who were laughing, oblivious to the conversation. He looked back at her, and for the first time Lirien noticed the way his eyes narrowed, as if he were seeing her for the first time, not as a soldier, not as an enemy, but as someone who might be more than that. I have to speak to command, he said, the resolve in his voice sparking a thread of fear in Lyrien's chest. If this works, it could be the turning point we all need. Then I'll do it, Lirien said, her voice breaking but strong. Tell them I'll be ready. The night stretched on, its quiet filled with unspoken promises and uncharted dangers. When Aron left to report to the higher-ups, Lyrien's mind raced, each thought a flash of terror and hope intertwined. Would they believe her? Would her own kind consider peace? Or would they see betrayal as the only path to survival? A few hours later, the camp stirred as soldiers gathered around the main tent, where Aron was addressing a small assembly of leaders. Lirien stood at the periphery, her heart pounding as she caught snippets of their conversations. Are you sure she's trustworthy? Major Kellis's voice cut through the murmur, sharp and suspicious. Aron's answer came with a fierceness that surprised Lirien. She's not just a prisoner. She's a voice from the other side. We need to listen. The tent's flaps parted, and Aron emerged, his eyes meeting hers. He signaled her to follow, and she stepped forward, her legs trembling. The camp seemed to hold its breath as she walked to Aron's side. I've spoken to them, he said quietly, only for her ears. They're going to hear you out. But know this. If this fails, there will be no second chance. Lirien nodded, fear curling in her stomach like a snake. But when she looked up at him, she saw something in his gaze that made her breath catch. Trust. Hope. The tent was crowded, voices thick with suspicion. The generals, flanked by their aides, stood in rigid lines, and the air was heavy with anticipation. Captain Voss, one of them barked, You brought her here. Speak. Aron glanced at Lirien, then back at the assembly. She knows something that could end this war. Let her speak. Lirien took a deep breath, the room swirling around her. All eyes were on her, human and Xarven alike. In that moment, she was neither soldier nor enemy, but a bridge between two fractured worlds. My name is Lirien, she began, her voice stronger than she'd ever known. And I want to tell you how this can end. Whispers rippled through the room, doubt mingling with curiosity. Lirien felt Aron's steady presence behind her, a silent promise that no matter what came next, she wouldn't be alone. Before I speak, she added, looking at the faces before her, I need you to believe that peace is possible. It's not a lie we tell ourselves. It's the only truth we have left. The room fell silent, and in that moment, the first glimmer of hope caught fire, ready to ignite. The murmurs in the tent simmered, shifting from skepticism to something less tangible, an uneasy curiosity. Lirien stood at the center, her posture stiff, eyes darting from one face to another, searching for any sign of hope or resistance. The air was thick with tension, a taut string waiting to snap. She could feel the weight of the moment pressing on her shoulders, but she held her head high. Continue, barked Major Kellis, his sharp voice slicing through the silence. His eyes narrowed, and his expression suggested that he already deemed her a liar. It was a battle she'd fought countless times in her own world, convincing those who had no reason to listen. But this was different. Here, her voice would mean more than words. It would be a lifeline. My people's pride has blinded them, Lirien began, her voice echoing in the tent. They've been fighting for control, not for survival. But their victories have come at too high a cost. The outposts, the cities, the fleets, they're all hollow now. What's left of my people is scarred and weary. They can be broken. A murmur of disbelief swept through the human officers. One of the generals, a tall, wiry man with silver hair, leaned forward, eyes narrowing as if trying to read her mind. And why should we believe you? The Xarven have always been ruthless. You speak of peace, but your people don't know the meaning of it. Lirien's gaze met the general's. His challenge made her spine straighten, the words becoming more urgent. I've spent my life serving the war machine, but I never believed in the cause. I was a soldier, yes, but I also witnessed the suffering in my own ranks, the hunger, the loss. My people are not gods. They are shattered beings trying to hold on to a dying dream. Aron shifted behind her, his expression unreadable, but the glint in his eyes betraying his hope. She took a deep breath and continued, her voice stronger now, resonating with the raw honesty that only comes when one is desperate to be heard. If you press forward, you will defeat us, but you will also destroy what's left of our species. But if you strike a deal, if you give us a chance to speak to our leaders, to offer them an alternative, then maybe, just maybe, we can save what's left. A sharp silence settled over the tent. It was the general with the silver hair who spoke first, his voice low and thoughtful. You're asking us to trust you, a former soldier of the enemy. I'm asking you to listen, Lirien said. That is all. My people are on the brink of a choice. One that could either lead to total devastation or to something none of us could have imagined, peace. Kellis scoffed, the harsh sound breaking the fragile hope. And if this is a trap, what then? We send our troops into a slaughter. That's the risk. Aron spoke up, his voice carrying a weight Lirien hadn't heard before. But what if it's not? We can't go on like this. I know it, you know it, and so does she. I say we take the chance. The silver-haired general turned his gaze to Aron. For a moment, it seemed as if he would disagree, but then the hardness in his eyes softened. He glanced at Lirien, then at the others gathered, and nodded once. Proceed, he said, his voice rough with reluctant agreement. But if this goes wrong, you will answer for it, Captain. Aron nodded. Understood. Lirien felt a strange warmth bloom in her chest. It wasn't victory yet, but it was the first step towards it. The humans would listen and maybe, just maybe, her people would too. The next day, a signal was sent, a tentative transmission from the human camp to the heart of the Xarven command. Lirien's heart thumped in her chest as she sat with Aron in the command tent, watching the flickering screen that displayed the crude translation interface. It was a risk, one that could shatter both hope and lives, but she could feel the thrum of possibility in the air. The transmission ended, and the silence that followed felt like a countdown. The soldiers in the room shifted uncomfortably, glancing at each other and at Aron. He kept his composure, but Lirien could sense his exhaustion, the tension in the set of his jaw. A sudden chime cut through the tent, and the screen flickered to life. The figure that appeared was unmistakable, a high-ranking Xarven officer, dressed in the dark, angular armor that marked the warlords of her people. His eyes, once fierce with ambition, now appeared hollow, as if all the fire had been sucked out of him. What is this? His voice rasped, the translator struggling to bridge the gap between languages. It's a chance, Lirien replied, stepping forward. Her voice was steady, though her body felt like it was unraveling. A chance to end this, to stop the slaughter before it consumes both our worlds. The officer's eyes flickered with recognition, but then the sharp lines of his face hardened. You speak treason. Why? Because there is nothing left to gain from fighting, she said. The war has taken everything, and if we don't act now, it will take more. A murmur rose in the officers' ranks. One voice rose above the others, young and defiant. If we surrender, we will be forgotten, humiliated. The officer hesitated, a brief lapse that Lirien seized upon. We don't have to surrender to be remembered. We can rebuild together, learn from what we were. We can show that we are more than the sum of our failures. For the first time, the officer's eyes seemed to search hers, not with suspicion, but with something else, something fragile and raw. Silence enveloped the tent once more. But this time, it was not a silence of doubt. It was the silence before change. And as Lirien looked up at Aron, she knew this was the beginning of something new. They were no longer just soldiers in a war. They were the first embers of a future that could one day burn brighter than all the destruction behind them.